Hello and welcome to Hudson Institute. It's my pleasure to welcome today to the Institute Ambassador Tomáš Pojar, the National Security Advisor of the Government of the Czech Republic. And I'll begin right away by complimenting you, Mr. Ambassador, for your countrymen's selection of head of government and head of state because they have wonderful first names. Petr. My name is Peter Rao, which would be the English equivalent of that. And I am part of a team working on Europe issues here at Hudson. Ambassador Pojar hails from a country known for high-minded intellectuals who have made the transition to the practice of foreign policy. One thinks back to Václav Havel and Václav Klaus. He's very much so in that tradition as an academic turned foreign policy hand, having served in very high-level positions in the Czech Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Most recently, prior to becoming National Security Advisor, he was, very interestingly for today's discussion, ambassador to Israel. He also served as Deputy Minister for Security and EU Affairs, as well as bilateral relations to individual European Union countries in the Czech ministry. He studied at the famed Charles University in Prague and also at IDC Herzliya, known now as Reichman University, where he focused on counterterrorism issues, and is a great friend of Hudson Institute's, and it's a real pleasure to have you here today. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for taking the time.
Thank you very much. Always a pleasure to be here.
Well, it's hard to avoid, given that Washington's focus is riveted on the Middle East, that topic to begin with. The president just announced last night that he'd be traveling to Israel tomorrow. Secretary Blinken held a meeting with the Israeli War Cabinet that I think will go down in the annals of history as really a major moment. Over 7.5 hours of talks with the Israelis. He, of course, is in Israel and has been spending time traveling the region. As the National Security Advisor to the Czech Prime Minister, which I would add is also a newly codified position in the Czech system. Yep. What was your first reaction when you heard about the attacks in Israel, and how is the Czech government processing the events unfolding there now?
Well, on one hand, it was a shock, not so unsurprising, because it's very clear what the nature of Hamas and Hezbollah and Islamic Jihad of those groups is and what their intentions. But of course, we didn't expect it. But there was a unanimous condemnation of what has happened, and unanimously calling terrorists, which is still sometimes somewhere in some parts of the world unique. And there, I think the Czech public as well as Czech political scene is the government and the opposition is quite united behind Israel and supportive of Israel, as it has been the case for the last 30 years. So we've been one of the most pro-Israeli countries or countries and societies which have been feeling close with the Israelis and their fight for and struggle for freedom and safety and security. And I think this has only fortified that.
I think there is a special connection between Central and Eastern European countries and the Czech Republic in particular with Israel, perhaps because of the large diaspora that has made Aliyah to Israel over the years, perhaps because the Czech public views Zionism as a form of Israeli nationalism, which they can understand. And there doesn't seem to be the same sort of borderline, if not outright, anti-Semitic protests that we see in other parts of Europe, in Central and Eastern Europe. What's that special relationship like, and how are we to understand it?
I don't know if it's that much made because of, or that much close because of diaspora, because the Czech diaspora has never been very strong in Israel. Most of the Czech Jews were slaughtered during the Second World War, so there was not that much immigration to Israel. But I think we have been close to each other in the past, and it was also, you can see that over the centuries, I would say, or at least last 2 centuries, that the level of anti-Semitism in Czech society was always the lowest in Europe, and especially in Central Europe. And so there was some kind of affinity between Czechs and Jews, and we did see ourselves maybe similarly as victims of oppressors and victims of German oppression and others. Yes, and I think the closeness comes from that. And also there is a tradition of Czech support to Israel. It was founder of Czechoslovakia, Tomáš Masaryk, who visited Yishuv at that time before the existence of Israel in 1927, and he was the first statesman of the world to visit. And from that there is this tradition of warm relations, which was of course broken during the communist times and by the Soviet rule and Soviet regime, but it got back immediately after 1989, and it has. And again, it's got, you would say here, bipartisan support, but it's like multi-partisan support across the Czech society, very solid in the last 3 decades. So we have been standing behind Israel, and we will continue to do so in the future.
Your prime minister has publicly floated the idea of making relations even warmer by moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Our board chair, Sarah Stern, I remember when the Americans took that decision, she was at that ceremony, twittered nice pictures from the embassy move. I can promise Sarah Stern will be at the Czech event as well if you move it to Jerusalem. Any announcement you want to make here in Washington?
No announcements, but I hope that we are approaching the situation that we will that there will be a decision to do it. By the way, the Czech Parliament voted unanimously, 162 to 0, in support of moving embassy to Jerusalem once the time is appropriate. Okay, so of course it should bring more good and no more damage, and we should not view it only in the lens or through Czech-Israeli relations, but in a broader perspective. But de facto, we've been recognizing Jerusalem as capital of Israel in the past and now, and I think that there should be time to do it de jure. But let's see when the decision will come and when it's going to be done.
Okay, we'll stay tuned. The major news, I think, of real significant strategic importance in the bilateral relationship between the U.S. and the Czech Republic is your recent announcement to acquire 24 F-35s at I think, market value of around $6.5 billion, the biggest purchase by a Czech government in its history. Can you talk about the significance of that, what led to the decision, and what it portends for the future of Czech national security?
Well, I don't know what the market value is. The real value is fortunately a little bit lower than the market value you mentioned. But yes, it's a significant investment. And I think that we can thank indirectly to Mr. Putin for invasion of Ukraine, because it has really got us back, and not only Czechs, but others in Europe, back into senses and into more investment into defense. And we've started to say from the day one of the invasion that we should take it as an opportunity also. Opportunity for improving our defense capabilities, opportunity for deepening our relations with our key strategic partners and allies, for working on joint projects, and this is one of the projects. So the decision was made. Now we will see how fast the agreement will be signed, but as we have been modernizing our Air Force, our helicopter fleet with Americans already for several years now, we are switching also into the 5th generation fighter jets and going into 2% of GDP next year by law. Signing and having now effective the defense cooperation agreement with US. Right. But we are working with others as well, and I think that as enemies do unite, Putin has united us, and we must thank him for that.
And he's united us over Ukraine, of course. Your embassy has produced this very snappy fact sheet on Czech support to Ukraine, which none of which is secret, so I'm not spilling any secrets here. But since February of 2022, of course, when the full-scale invasion took place, the Czechs have donated material and organized shipments of arms to Ukraine at around 2.2 billion, export license around 4.32 billion. Describe a little bit Czech strategy when it comes to the war in Ukraine and how you're working with us and our European and other partners on the conflict.
Well, the core of the strategy is that, as we have always seen, the further the Russia is from us, the better. So we must support Ukrainians to keep Russians as far as possible. And of course, we must support Ukrainians because if they would fail and if Ukraine would fall and if it would be occupied, as was the original idea of Putin, then we would have again Soviet Union recreated on the border of Slovakia, which is much closer to us, and we should not we should take seriously what Russians have been saying in the last couple of years and what they are saying now, that they want to go prior to 1997 regarding the architecture in Europe, which basically mean that in a way they go back to Ribbentrop-Molotov a little bit shifted. That they only accept the enlargement of NATO by East Germany. Okay, in this, so they are on purpose saying not going beyond or before prior to 89, but going prior to 97, which excludes East Germany. So they understand that it's Germany is unified, but the rest should be put into reverse. And from that, our key strategy is, and we have been the first country to supply Ukraine with tanks, artillery, MLRS systems, and attack helicopters, first from the world. The first shipments of rocket systems came less than 2 weeks after the outbreak of invasion. And together with many partners, as it's listed with American, British, Dutch, and Danish mostly, but with many others, we have succeeded in sending through our system every year from the day one of the war, and now there is day 600, at least one piece of heavy equipment, so at least one tank, one attack helicopter, one MLRS system, one infantry fighting vehicle, and every day almost 15,000 rounds of mid and large caliber ammunition. Almost 9 million rounds up to today. So I think it, and without international cooperation, without cooperation with countries which I have named, but with many other countries, and without deep cooperation on those shipments, it would not be possible. But it has opened us really new avenues of thinking how we can cooperate with others and how to work with others to our mutual benefit. And I think that those people who are working in the system and who are working there together, then they will remember it for their life, and those bonds will not be broken, and they are there. So it's an investment into the future. But the war has been already long, and it will be long. It will be longer. It's not ending now. So we are there for long, and we have to think really in perspective of not next weeks and months, but of next years. And we have to continue supplying Ukraine with arms in support of their defense, regardless if ceasefire is reached or not, or once ceasefire is reached or once the fighting ceases, because it will be needed even after that, because we must keep Ukraine strong, and we must not give Russians an impression they can restart the war rather sooner than later.
Do you see any evidence of a push for a ceasefire?
Not now. I don't think we are there yet. And I don't know where we are going to be there yet. And I think we should not be pushing from outside. It must be up to Ukrainians, and at the end up to Ukrainians and Russians to decide. And we must give all the backing to Ukrainians, because if it would be pushed from outside, it wouldn't work, and it wouldn't last, and it would weaken Ukraine. So it would not be in our benefit. But at the end, as most conflicts are not endless, so they do end. I don't mean in peace treaties. Peace treaties may be decades far from today and generations far from now. But really the fighting, or the magnitude of fighting as we do see it, it's not sustainable probably for many, many years. So we have to be ready for that moment, and we have to be ready for supporting Ukraine if it gets into what I call the Konrad Adenauer moment of focusing on the western part of Ukraine as large as possible, as the free part of Ukraine, to build their state, to support their economy, to build their defense forces, and eventually to unite and reunite with the rest, which they will not be able to liberate now. But we have to have this. We have to give this backing to Ukraine, and we have to get that part of the free part of Ukraine, and again, as large as possible. get it European perspective and get it integrated into the European economy and into the European Union and NATO as much as possible, because it is to our benefit. At the end, Ukrainians are fighting there on our behalf. And if they were not fighting, then the front line would be much closer to us.
Well, as you said, most wars do end. They tend to end either in victory or defeat more often than some sort of negotiated off-ramp, at least historically, empirically, I think that's true. Do you think Ukraine's on the pathway to victory right now? Or it sounds like the scenario you're describing is they make some gains and then at some point there is a occupied East and a free West of Ukraine.
I think it depends how you define victory, and it's up to Ukrainians to define victory for themselves. So I don't want to define it for themselves. For us, Czechs, the victory is that the original Putin's idea, occupy and reunite, so reconquer, let's say, whole of Ukraine into and reintegrate it into the Russian Empire, Soviet Empire, as you name it, that this is not achieved. For us, everything is victory, but Russian soldiers on the border of Slovakia.
What have you heard from your conversations with American officials and interlocutors here in Washington since you've arrived about our stamina on Ukraine and our path going forward? Are you worried at all? I mean, some Europeans do come to Washington and worry that given the imbroglio that is the speaker's race in the House and some disenchantment with spending more money on Ukraine, that America is not going to be there in the long run. Do you share that concern, or are you more or less confident based on your conversations that the U.S. can continue to be the cornerstone ally in the coalition?
I am more or less confident, and I hope that U.S. can be like firm where it has been and showing leadership which nobody else can take or can replace, and leadership which we have seen basically from the beginning of the war, and if not from the day one, then very soon, and very helpful for the next year. But I, of course, don't know what's going to happen here with the elections and after the elections. So there I don't have the crystal ball and I don't want to judge it. But I am modestly optimistic regarding the next 12 months. I also must repeat that the U.S. leadership is indispensable, because without U.S. leadership, Europeans would have much more difficult time to back up Ukraine as much as it's necessary and as much as possible. At the same time, I can tell to everyone here in DC that I think that if there is going to be the U.S. leadership, then Europeans will follow. So it's not going to be that Europeans would give up if you would be on the right side still. So we have to work together. And we have to see other options. What would happen if we would not be working together? What would happen if Russia is successful? And what other costs in the future it would bring, and meaning economic costs, but of course human costs, and they would be tremendous. Russia is an empire. It thinks like an empire. All empires of this type must expand or must try to expand. And with success, the appetite only grows. So if the Russians and Russia would not stop. And Russia is saying that openly, so we should listen to Russians, what they are saying. We should listen to Russian leadership. We should look into the Russian textbooks, what is in the textbooks, and we should look what is happening on the streets. And one of the statues which is going up now is statues of Stalin. And I think this is the manifestation. And you have seen many statues of Stalin being erected now across Russia. I think this shows a lot about the society and about the leadership. And to put up a statue of Stalin, it's a political statement and a vision and a goal for the future. It's not a historical. It's not a historical mark.
We have a soft spot for Georgians at Hudson Institute, and my colleague Luke Coffey is almost a minor celebrity in Georgia because he's worked on it for so long. But that's one Georgian who we're a bit less fond of here at Hudson Institute. So I can imagine walking into the National Security Council or the Pentagon or Capitol Hill, whomever you're meeting with here in Washington, that the war in the Middle East, the looming ground incursion, which the Israelis seem to have telegraphed, as well as the war in Ukraine, are files 1 and 2 in your conversations. But perhaps you could fill out a bit what some other areas are in the bilateral relationship that are very important to you, and which some of our viewers at home who follow foreign policy at the margins might not be so aware of?
Well, on the bilateral, it's definitely about Ukraine, Russia, and about Middle East now, and what we can do together and how we can strengthen each other. It's very much about defense cooperation, we have already discussed, but it's also about economic cooperation. Listen, there are a lot of investments, a lot of Czech investments into American economy. In the last months, it's been billions of dollars. Yesterday, one of the Czech companies announced that they have signed a deal to buy the ammunition part of Vista Outdoor. Another Czech company recently bought American Colt. There have been investment into the energy here. There have been an investment into the real estate. So the major Czech companies and major Czech groups are investing on this side of the Atlantic. We of course like to have a boost of investments from this side of Atlantic into Central Europe and meaning into Czech Republic, but basically broader in the Central Europe, because it's Czech Republic is tiny and landlocked country. So if there is an investment into the neighborhood, it also has effects on our economy, because we think it's the solid, stable part of Europe. So a lot of focus is on economy and on investments and investments into where the government then stands into supporting investments into defense and supporting cooperation of various different companies. So for the F-35s, there are now 15 projects linked to the F-35 procurement, which are about the industrial cooperation, so the same goes with the Bell helicopters and the industrial cooperation there. So we are trying to expand it, and we are trying to get it done. And it's not only to be a sub-supplier, but also into R&D. And we have some successes, and it works. So we hope that we will get more successes, and there will be more. And so we hope that all the Raytheons and Lockheed Martins and all those giants will see that there is an opportunity and potential in Czech Republic before we buy them, of course.
At Hudson Institute, like many of our sister organizations here in Washington, we've put more and more resources into Indo-Pacific affairs. My colleague and your friend Ken Weinstein has joined us here today. He leads our Japan operation as the Japan chair. Miles Yu has launched a China Center here. He was a former State Department policy planning official and teaches in Annapolis at the Naval Academy. Patrick Cronin, a well-known think tanker in Washington, is our Asia-Pacific Security Chair. We have a colleague sitting in Sydney who works on Australian issues. He was the advisor to Julie Bishop when she was the foreign minister. The point is we've really ratcheted up our work there. And the Czech Republic has also made some headlines, might I say, in recent years on its China policy in particular. Could you sketch out the trajectory of your country's views on China and how the engagement with China is going? There was just an important meeting that the Chinese hosted on the Central and Eastern Europe Plus format, which has made a bit of news as well, where the Czech Republic sees itself there and just generally on that region.
I think we want to have fair, open, and constructive relations with China. And we are starting and we are having some, I think after years, good dialogue with China. And I think if we are open and sincere, then the Chinese are also open and sincere. That has been at least my experience in the last years. But we have to be open in protecting our critical infrastructure, and we have to speak openly with Chinese, and we have to work on let's say spreading the risk regarding the dependence on individual countries and individual sources of technologies, etc. So it's not only about China, but because China is so huge, then it's a lot about China. And that's why we are trying to diversify our trade and our exports and imports regarding the overall Indo-Pacific region. So I accompanied Prime Minister for his trip around 6 Indo-Pacific and then 2 Central Asian countries. And we have talked mostly about strategic cooperation in the raw materials and in some components. But basically, it's about spreading the risk in this globalized world, which is shaky. The Europeans have. I remember going to Brussels 15, 20 years ago, and everyone there, or most of the people there around the table, were dreaming about multipolar world, getting out of this like unipolar US-driven world. So they have it now. They said it would be more democratic. So I'm not sure if this is more democratic. In a way, yes, it's definitely more chaotic, and it's definitely more multipolar, and it's gonna be continuing in this direction most likely. So we have to get ready for that. And we have to adjust as much as possible and as better as possible. But at the same time, yes, my discussions here are also about Asia. But the war, which is really important for us, it's Ukraine, and then of course the situation in the Middle East. But a lot of our discussions are and have been in the past, and open discussions are about the about the Chinese-Russian relationship and about Chinese support to Russia and how we view it and how.
What is that relationship? How would you describe it?
Well, I think that the Chinese are, on one hand, they could have been supporting Russians more economically, but also more in terms of lethal supplies, arms supplies, etc. So they have fortunately not be opening gates of those supplies, but at the same time they are supplying quite critical dual-use material or dual-use components to Russians, that the Russians are able to fight better, and that we do see a lot of Chinese technologies on those missiles which are being shot at Ukrainian cities and killing Ukrainian civilians and targeting Ukrainian towns. So I think that we should really continue the discussion, and open discussion and frank discussion with Chinese, and I have done that, and I will continue to do that. I'm ready to listen to their arguments, but at the same time I was born under the Soviet occupation, and I don't want to fall under the Soviet occupation anymore.
Yeah,
and by the way, whoever is, in my eyes, whoever is helping that Soviet occupation, then is on the other side of the world I would like to see it.
Unfortunately, as Can Kasapoulou, one of our in-house military analysts who produces a weekly military situation report, has shown, that includes a lot of American companies which have provided electronic parts that find their way into Russian military kit. And I think we have a bit of work to do to shut down some of the sanctions evasion on dual-use items. From the Chinese, it might be a bit more overt on the quadcopters, among other items, but there's some leakage, it seems, in the sanctions regime as well.
Well, there are leakages on the sanctions regime everywhere, and it's not only leakages regarding China, it's leakages also from Europe and from US, and we do see it. So we have to go. The sanctions are very complicated. So there is no other way than improve the sanctions. But the other side is also improving and innovating. So we must be also innovative. And with the sanction regimes, you have to be non-stop looking into the loopholes and how to seal them. So I just want to say that this is not purely about China and not only about China. It's about the whole world, and how to get something from one side of the globe to the other. You can use many countries and many channels, and you can have those who are involved and very much know what is going on, and those who are involved and do not know what is going on. But again, this is also for discussion with Chinese, but not only Chinese.
There seems to be quite a few camps on the sanctions front, but one delineation would be between those who say, as you put it, we need to seal the loopholes. Another camp is that we need to fundamentally ratchet up the sanctions themselves, look again at the price cap and whether or not it's been an effective tool. Would you put yourself and your government in one or the other camps, or how would you describe that?
I have no problems with squeezing the price cap or making it again functional. But we have to always look into the sanctions, and we've been always supporting sanctions and robust sanctions, etc. Right. But at the same time, I think we have to always look if the particular sanctions are gonna do more harm to Russians than to us, okay?
Right.
So when there have been some proposals of some sanctions, which at the end I think would do more harm to us and less to Russians. One of the files is the nuclear file and Rosatom, etc. And we've been always saying, listen, let's think what it would mean if Rosatom is sanctioned and many countries would have to shut down their nuclear plants. Would it bring more support for Ukrainians? Would it be better politically to sustain the war and the crisis and the long-term fight and long-term support of Ukrainians, or would it backfire? So we have to look into it like very practically, and it's also changing over the time. So we have to see what hits Russians more than us, and we have to understand the situation in different parts of the world and different countries, and we should not put anyone against the wall, because then again it would backfire. What is really important is to keep the unity, and especially in the EU we must have unity in NATO as well, but there has to be an agreement of all the 27 for the sanctions, right. Otherwise it would not work. So we have to be smart and open among ourselves also what kind of sanctions are there for today and what are there in the future, and where we are heading to, and we should look long term. Also, at the same time, we should not fall into the trap saying that sanctions will solve it. Sanctions don't solve the problems. Sanctions are for weakening of the other side, for gaining for us like more space than to the other side, but they are always long-term, and they can be always misused at the end, and they are not the silver bullet solution. Silver bullet solutions don't exist, and the sanctions are never a silver bullet solution. So yes, sanctions are one part of the struggle and one part of the equation,
toolkit.
But it's not a toolkit. But it's not something which we should hide behind and hope that this is gonna solve it. It's not gonna solve it.
If I didn't ask about the specific Central and Eastern European region, my colleague, senior fellow Matt Boyce, would scold me because he knows more about this area than he's forgotten more about this than I'll ever know. So you've had a series of elections in the Visegrad states. It began with I believe the Hungarians, then you all had elections, the Slovaks, now the Poles voted over the weekend. So we have at least some clarity, because there will not be any elections in the coming months at the national level in any of those four countries. How do you think the Visegrad concept settles in now? And if you'd like to comment on the Polish elections in particular, we'd welcome that as well.
At the end, I think nothing has changed. Okay, there is some kind of mythology around Visegrad. So Visegrad is it's four countries, neighbors, which usually don't agree on most of the things, then do agree, because we have different agriculture and different energy needs, and as Czechs we are landlocked, and as Slovaks and Hungarians, unlike Poles, and as Czechs we don't have any Schengen border, meaning border now temporary, yes, but we are not on the front line, so unlike the others are. So at the end, in the past, in the last 30 years, there were only rare moments where all four Visegrad countries would vote together. Okay? But it's natural. It's nothing like unique, and it's nothing wrong. And it's a group of neighboring countries with similar but not the same historical experience, with a different geographical location. So from US, it looks, from the other side of globe, it looks like it looks like the same. But at the end, Polish experience with Russia and Poland having border with Russia, it's completely different than our experience, or for example, or not completely, but very different than our experience and historical experience than the Hungarian experience, which is much more closer, and Hungary much more closer to the Balkans. So we have to take it as it is, and we have to keep Visegrad as a platform of neighbors talking to each other, and it's always good that neighbors who are at the same time allies in EU and in NATO, etc., that they talk to each other, and that we don't lose the big picture and who are the major challenges and challengers to us. And so from that point of view, I don't think that much is going to happen. You will see different rhetoric. You will see different rhetoric from Slovakia. You will, after the elections, you will see different rhetoric from Poland. But in substance, I don't think you will see that many changes. And I don't think that you will see that much unique language from those countries or from Slovakia and from Poland compared to others in Europe, and I don't mean only in Central or Eastern or Eastern Europe.
Yeah, we recently on our podcast Counterbalance, my colleague Mike Duran and I interviewed your Deputy Chief of Mission here, Jan Havernek. It'll be appearing in a future episode, but one point we took away from that was not to group all the countries of Central and Eastern Europe into one bucket, which sometimes from the distance of Washington across the Atlantic.
Where we were always part of the Holy Roman Empire, okay? So we are not Eastern Europe, okay? So I think let's get it straight. Right. The Czechs and Bohemia has been always part of Western Europe. Right. And we can say, okay, there were, during the time of the Cold War, it was divided east-west, and we were on the eastern side, and then for 20 years occupied by Soviets and by Soviet army directly. But otherwise, we are part of Western Europe. So we are saying here in Washington, don't put us only to this B9 or something like that. Look at us also as you are looking at the Danes and Dutch and other neighbors of Germany. Okay, so because this is our, and in reality, and if you look politically, and if you look economically, and if you look historically, then there we are much more in this Central European concept than in Eastern Europe or then, God forbid, in the Balkans.
Well, considering I have an Austrian mother, she's nodding along furiously to your references to...
Yeah, Vienna is east of Prague,
That's
okay?
Right.
So you are East European.
That was going to be my next point, yeah. I'm going to ask you one more question, and then I'd like to just open to two audience questions. Luke Coffey and Matt Boyce, if we could prepare the microphones for that. And my last question before we go to those two to close us out is, this week we're privileged to host Ursula von der Leyen, unless the president's schedule ends up canceling her trip, but I'm optimistic that won't happen. And she has spoken about a geopolitical European Commission and the European Commission and the European Union becoming a greater actor in foreign and security policy. Could you just comment on that and how you see that from the point of view of Prague?
I think it's great when we were together. I think the unity which we have shown, the European unity, or EU unity, which we have shown during the Ukraine, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I hope that it's going to be similar, hard to achieve, but similar unity regarding the situation in the Middle East and aftermath of those barbaric terrorist attacks of Hamas. So that's there, and we have to work on it, and it's a must. At the same time, I'm more from the traditional school of conducting of foreign policy, and so you can have successful foreign policy if it can be supported by your economy and by your army. Okay, so EU has good economy; it's one of the largest economic blocs. So the EU foreign policy can really be beefed up by the economy,
but an army like the Pope's.
But there is no army, and there will not be army, and you cannot give anyone security guarantees. You cannot threaten anyone. So by that you have your foreign policy is and will be by definition limited. And again, it's not bad, but we have to realistically look at it, and we have to look to other tools. And for us, Czechs, and for many other Europeans, the transatlantic bond is completely crucial. So we should nurture the transatlantic bond. We should invest ourselves. We must invest ourselves into this transatlantic bond and also into our defense capabilities. But we hope that U.S. will still see it as very important, even in the face of pivot to Asia or how you name it, but that it makes sense. And if there are some troubles in on the other side of globe, again, there will be value in this transatlantic unity and in that the type of cooperation, be it on the defense issues, intelligence issues, as well as economically and technologically. So we have to, we are a solid bloc, and American economy is also solidly large, but technologically to compete in the world, we have to keep this transatlantic link together and then work with other partners like Japan, South Korea, and Australia, and others to be strong and to be competitive and to have this technological edge and not to lose it.
Great. Luke Coffey, the floor is yours.
Thanks. Hi, Luke Coffey, Senior Fellow here at Hudson. Thanks for coming here today to talk about these issues. I want to swing it back to NATO. We're now about 100 days since the most recent summit in June. We're all focused on the 75th anniversary summit here in Washington, D.C., scheduled for next year. What are the big challenges and obstacles we have to overcome between now and the next summit to make sure that that next summit here in Washington is a success? Thanks.
There will be a lot of discussion about Ukraine, so we have to really work together on practically supporting Ukraine, but also getting Ukraine closer to us and solving the issue of the Ukrainian path to membership in NATO, and that's going to be most likely on the table here. And we have to really do our homework and continue with defense spending and with building up our capabilities and working together. I've mentioned F-35s and helicopters as a great cooperation between the US and Czech Republic. But we have a great cooperation, and we want to expand it now on the tank fleet with Germany. Yes, we have sent our tanks to Ukraine. We have received as a backfilling some Leopard A4 tanks from Germany. We will invest into the new tanks, so we will have a new Leopard A4 and A8 fleet, which will give us capability, but which will give us a lot of potential for cooperation and training and deployment, not only with Germans, but with others who are operating Leopard tanks. So we have to focus on that. And I think there is another task that we have to really focus on and support and do as much as possible for the private business to beef up defense production. And it's not always easy. The bigger the corporations are, the harder is to move them. But I really hope that defense industry would use the opportunity, as many of them are doing, but that all of that, and that we will have more robust and better defense industry, more competitive globally than we have now, and really able to supply what we need now and what we need into the future. So I think that there is going to be a lot of discussion, not only about spending and building up the capabilities, but a lot of discussions about the industrial base, which is equally important, and where we see that some improvements, that the laziness of the past 30 years, that we have to overcome some issues out of it. But it's still too far. Okay, it's 100 years from the last summit. It's a lot of 100 days from the last summit. A lot of many months from the next summit here in Washington. But
you had the Holy Roman Empire on the mind.
Yes, exactly. So,
Mr. Boyce.
Thank you very much for your interesting comments. I would just drill down a little bit more on your observations about the elections in Slovakia and Poland. Sort of, as I understood, you were sort of more on the mode of not much will change with the changes of government there. Some of the tone coming out of Slovakia is rather different in some important areas, and of course the tone will change in Poland as well. And just wondering whether you could maybe expand on your remarks a little bit more about where you think those countries will go, not just within the Visegrad format, but also more broadly. And then if I could also drill down also on your initial comments on Syria, on the Middle East. you are we don't often thank you enough for being our protecting power in Syria, and you've got very sophisticated observations about your relationships about the Middle East region. So if you could maybe expand a little bit more on where you think that might be going in the next weeks, and thank you.
It's a little bit difficult for me to comment openly on the situation and on the election results and what I think will be there as rhetoric or as concrete deeds regarding Slovakia and Poland, since they are our neighbors. Okay, so it's so I'm not in very comfortable situation, but so you will see different rhetoric different rhetoric from Slovakia in terms of questioning sanctions regarding Russia, in terms of questioning supplies of arms to Ukraine, in terms of energy supplies. But at the end, I think you will see a lot of pragmatic politics from Slovakia regarding EU and regarding NATO. Let's see and let's wait. But we got messages from Prime Minister designate Fico that he will be solid member of NATO and partner of NATO, and Slovakia will stay there as well as pragmatic member of the EU. You will see a lot of rhetoric and hear a lot of rhetoric regarding migration. But it's not going to be that much new. It's going to be more strong than the previous Slovak government or outgoing Slovak government. But at the end, migration was an issue, and it has been discussed. And Poland has been always very solid, strong NATO member and transatlantic partner. So there, I had no doubts that regardless of results of the elections, there will be solid Western-oriented Polish government. You will see more pro-EU rhetoric from Warsaw than more confrontational rhetoric from the existing government. But in reality, not that much, I think, will change. And what is going to be crucial for us and for all of us is how the relations between Poland and Ukraine will go. There, of course, the effects of the elections had its mark on the relations. But there, I think that it will go back to not maybe back to a year ago of how friendly and warm the relations were, and how only friendly comments were there from Warsaw regarding Ukraine. But it will go solidly back and out of the electoral campaign rhetoric, and Poland will be clearly key partner in supporting Ukraine in the future. But here is the same. The enemies do unite, and there Mr. Putin unites, and it will at the end unite Poland with Ukraine more. But I understand their relations are long-term, historically complicated, and you cannot escape history, so they have to talk openly about it as well. So there we have some advantage. We are far from Ukraine, and we have never been neighbors of Ukraine, and we can only claim some part of Ukraine to get back, but we will not do it. So it's already forgotten, and it's a history, and there is Slovakia in between us and Transcarpathia. On the Middle East, it's a lot about Iran. Okay? So it's Khamenei who will decide if Hezbollah is going to join the fight or not. And I must really salute the U.S. decision of the administration to send the aircraft carriers as a clear message, not to Hamas, but to Hezbollah and to Iran. And I think that those messages have to be strong, and we should support them from Europe, especially the key European countries, key European not only economies, but those who have some defense capabilities, and that they should be in line with US with that messaging. And I hope that Iranians will not join the fight, but I cannot rule it out, and we will see. The situation is completely dangerous. I don't think that the decision has been made yet. It will also depend on the developments on the ground, and there may be surprises for everyone, even for those who would conduct something, but they do not know what will be out of it, and they have not decided to conduct something. So let's see. And we have, as Czechs, going back to Czechoslovakia, we've had global relationships, and we have had from the communist times embassies in many countries of the Middle East, and we have had always Middle Eastern politics or views and policy. But in the last 30 years, always having strong ties with Israel and with key Arab countries, and we hope that pragmatically, it will go for long-term relationship there based on pragmatic views and pragmatism rather than on revolutionary ideas. But again, let's see what's going to be the outcome. And the fact that we are representing US in Syria, yes, we are there and we will be there. At the same time, I wouldn't expect from us any major peace initiatives. I think there is. We are not enthusiasts in making peace initiatives, so we will not see any proposals. And I think we understand what our size is and what our value is, and how we can contribute. So we can hopefully modestly contribute in the right direction. But we are a mid-sized country. We are not small, but we are not the key players, and we will not be key players in the Middle East. So let's work. We are ready always and everywhere to work with our partners, and we are ready to openly talk to our challengers. And maybe by this we will a little bit contribute to the world, which is going to be a little bit better than what it could have been.
Let's hope so. Mr. Ambassador, thanks for bringing this opportunity to us. Tomáš Pojar, National Security Advisor of the Western European country of the Czech Republic. Thanks for that tour de force, and thanks to all of you at home for tuning in. Please tune in for more of our work on the crisis in the Middle East, on the war in Ukraine at hudson.org. We look forward to seeing you at future events, and please take a read through our website of all of our scholarship and work that we have on there. Thanks so much, and thanks again for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.